Act Way. The storm gathers. In the early hours of June 22, 1941, a line of fire ignited across Eastern Europe. From the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea, artillery thundered, engines roared, and millions of men crossed a frontier that had, until that moment, existed only on maps and in fragile treaties. It was the largest military invasion in human history, launched without a declaration of war, driven by ideology, fear, and ambition. The opening blows seemed decisive, even unstoppable. Yet beneath the speed and violence lay deeper forces, economic pressures, political miscalculations, and historical rivalries stretching back centuries. What unfolded over the following months would shatter assumptions about modern warfare and redraw the course of the Second World War. This was not merely an invasion. It was a collision between systems, armies, and worldviews, the consequences of which would echo far beyond the battlefield. By mid-1941, Europe was largely under German domination. Poland had been defeated in weeks, France in 6. Britain stood alone in the West, resisting but unable to challenge German power on the continent. Yet Adolf Hitler viewed the war's center of gravity not in London but in the East. The Soviet Union, bound to Germany by the 1939 Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, was both partner and potential enemy, a state whose vast resources and ideology Hitler believed made conflict inevitable. For Stalin, the pact had been a temporary shield. The Soviet Union used the time to expand its borders westward and rebuild its military after the purges of the late 1930s. But mutual distrust defined the relationship. German victories intensified Soviet fears, while Hitler grew convinced that Britain's refusal to surrender depended on the hope of Soviet intervention. Operation Barbarossa was conceived as a war of annihilation, aimed not only at military defeat, but at the destruction of the Soviet state itself. It mattered before it began because it transformed a European war into a global one of unprecedented scale, committing Germany to a two-front struggle and placing the industrial and human resources of the Soviet Union at the center of the conflict. Act 2. The plans. Germany assembled an enormous invasion force, roughly 3 million troops supported by thousands of tanks, aircraft, and artillery pieces. Commanded overall by Hitler, the campaign was divided among 3 army groups. Army Group North advanced toward Leningrad. Army Group Center aimed for Moscow, and Army Group South targeted Ukraine and its vital agricultural and industrial regions. German morale was high, shaped by years of rapid victories and confidence in blitzkrieg tactics. The Soviet Union fielded even larger numbers, but its forces were unevenly prepared. Millions of soldiers were deployed near the border, many poorly trained and equipped. Command structures were rigid, and fear of political reprisal discouraged initiative. Stalin's strategic objective was survival, buying time to mobilize the country's immense manpower and industry. Both sides believed speed would be decisive. Germany sought a short war before winter and before Soviet strength could fully assert itself. The Soviets hoped to absorb the initial shock and preserve enough forces to continue the fight. The gap between these objectives would define the campaign. The geography of the Eastern Front shaped every plan. Vast distances, poor roads, and limited rail infrastructure challenged logistics from the outset. German supply systems, optimized for short campaigns in Western Europe, were stretched thin as forces advanced hundreds of kilometers. Fuel, ammunition, and spare parts depended on overland transport, vulnerable to delay. Weather was underestimated. Summer dust clogged engines and lungs. Autumn rains would soon turn roads into mud. Intelligence failures compounded these problems. German planners dismissed Soviet industrial capacity east of the Urals and underestimated the Red Army's ability to regenerate after defeat. Soviet intelligence, meanwhile, provided repeated warnings of invasion that Stalin largely discounted, fearing provocation. As June approached, German forces massed openly along the border, yet surprise was achieved through disbelief. When the invasion came, it struck an opponent unprepared politically and operationally, but not without depth, resilience, or resources. Act 3. The collision. The opening weeks of Operation Barbarossa were catastrophic for the Soviet Union. German forces advanced with speed and coordination, encircling entire Soviet armies in massive pockets at Białystok, Minsk, and Smolensk. Hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers were killed or captured. Airfields were overrun, and the Red Air Force suffered devastating losses on the ground. Yet, even amid collapse, signs of friction appeared. Soviet resistance, though disorganized, was relentless. Units fought on despite encirclement, slowing German timetables. Supply lines lengthened and vehicles broke down faster than they could be repaired. German casualties mounted steadily, a reality that clashed with expectations of an easy victory. By late summer, German forces had advanced deep into Soviet territory, but had not delivered a decisive blow. The Red Army continued to form new units, retreating but not disintegrating. What had begun as a lightning campaign was already showing signs of strain. If you were in command at this point, would you have made the same choice? Share your thoughts in the comments. The campaign pressed forward, but the gap between German plans and the realities of the Eastern Front was widening with every kilometer gained. Act 4. The Break. The critical turning point of Operation Barbarossa came not from a single battle, but from a strategic decision. In late summer 1941, as Army Group Center stood poised to advance on Moscow, Hitler diverted its armored forces south toward Ukraine and north toward Leningrad. The goal was to secure resources and eliminate remaining Soviet forces before the final push. The diversion achieved short-term successes, including the encirclement at Kiev, one of the largest in history. But it cost time. When the advance on Moscow resumed in autumn, weather and logistics turned against the Germans. Rains bogged down vehicles, and winter arrived earlier than expected. German troops, lacking adequate cold weather equipment, faced freezing temperatures as Soviet resistance stiffened. Crucially, the delay allowed the Soviet Union to mobilize reserves and relocate industry eastward. Fresh divisions, some transferred from Siberia, reinforced Moscow's defenses. The German offensive stalled, then failed. The belief in a quick, decisive victory collapsed. From this moment, Germany faced a prolonged war it was ill-prepared to win. Act V. The Aftershocks. By the end of 1941, Operation Barbarossa had failed to achieve its primary objectives. German forces had inflicted staggering losses, millions of Soviet casualties, including prisoners, but at immense cost. German casualties numbered in the hundreds of thousands, and the army was exhausted, overstretched, and facing a winter war for which it had not planned. Politically and strategically, the invasion transformed the war. The Soviet Union became a full member of the Allied coalition, and the Eastern Front absorbed the majority of German military strength for the remainder of the conflict. The scale of violence escalated, with civilians suffering enormously under occupation and scorched earth tactics. The immediate result was stalemate, but the long-term balance had shifted. Germany no longer dictated the pace of the war. The initiative, slowly but decisively, began to pass to the Soviet Union. Operation Barbarossa changed history because it altered the fundamental structure of the Second World War. It turned a conflict dominated by rapid German offensives into a war of attrition that favored industrial capacity, manpower, and endurance. By invading the Soviet Union, Germany committed itself to a struggle against an opponent capable of absorbing losses and rebuilding on a scale unmatched in Europe. The failure of Barbarossa ensured that Germany would fight on multiple fronts against increasingly coordinated enemies. It accelerated the United States' involvement, reshaped global alliances, and set the conditions for later battles such as Stalingrad and Kursk. Militarily, it exposed the limits of blitzkrieg and the dangers of ideological warfare overriding strategic reality. Historians continue to study Barbarossa not only for its scale, but for its lessons: the importance of logistics, the risks of underestimating an adversary, and the profound consequences of strategic overreach. The invasion did not end the war, but it made Germany's defeat increasingly inevitable. Operation Barbarossa stands as a reminder that wars are shaped as much by decisions and assumptions as by armies in the field. It was a moment when ambition collided with reality, and the course of the 20th century shifted irrevocably. If this battle helped you understand history better, consider sharing it with someone who values history. and follow the channel for more battles that changed history.